Welcome to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church, where we take the message from the weekend and keep the conversation going during the week. I'm Kathy Davis, and I'm going to be the host today, and I am joined by Nate Murray, campus pastor, Bay City, and the person who brought the fire yesterday in the sermon. So
fire. I like that.
I'm kind of like, sometimes I like to channel the younger kids.
Okay.
Like they kind of like that. I'm trying to like draw it in.
Okay.
So all that to say, we are here today. We were gone for a couple weeks. So I'm hoping that everyone is ready to get back around the table and start talking. I know you were talking without us, but now we're going to talk. And I was so glad to be in Saginaw yesterday. Nate, you had to trust your team in Bay City. They're all making it happen, and you came and hang out with us in Saginaw, so we were glad to have you. Thanks for coming.
It was a blast to be here, yeah.
Yeah.
And our team in Bay City is amazing.
I know, right?
They don't need me there.
Well, I know you know that.
Yeah.
They know that, but okay. So yesterday, thank you too. I want to say thank you because I kind of feel like you gave a shout out to me and Dan.
Oh, I definitely gave a shout out.
So
yeah.
I appreciated that, and thank you.
Yeah,
for that.
No, I meant what I said.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who haven't already watched the video, Pastor Dan and Pastor Paul sent out a video just outlining there's an end date that's been set now, something you guys felt led was important. And when that news was shared of that date, which is coming up at the end of the year now, it just resurfaced all the things that I felt. And we have to be mindful of the people in the room and what they're dealing with and what they're thinking. And especially if you're about to do a message and you're trying to take people somewhere to help them learn something and understand and apply something, that a big piece of information was put in their lap. And they likely were responding the same way I did when I started hearing the information, which was all the feelings I felt back at the beginning of the year came back to the surface. But at the beginning of the year, I felt one emotion, and then after a day or so, a different emotion, and then like a week later, a different emotion. But this time, something about that end date brought all the feelings together at one time. And so it was just mindful that people in the room were feeling that. And then gratitude really is when everything around me feels crazy. That's just a practice that I've gotten into, that if you look for what Jesus is doing and you express gratitude to him for what he's doing, then even if you don't understand it, it just helps recenter you. So in that moment, that was as much for me as anybody was, I'm going to recenter myself, but then hopefully we can all do it and be grateful. And we're going to have so much time to celebrate. We've got months left to celebrate all that's happened over the last 25 plus years. But man, that really is what I said. I've only got to enjoy being under Dan's leadership for a couple of years now. And you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit doing things like this. But so much of what I love about Hopevale, I know is because of the leadership Jesus has given through both of you. And
thank you.
So I don't have the 20 plus years of experience with you, but I think I enjoy all the benefits of having that kind of experience because you all have been so faithful to lead this church. And even in what you're doing now, that's where my emotions ended up. When I first heard the news was I cycled through different feelings and then ended up with gratitude and then ultimately moved to excitement, because I really do believe the Spirit's going to use what you all are being obedient in doing to follow the Spirit to catalyze his work in a lot of other people's lives. And as people see you and Dan go down this road, trusting Jesus, following the Spirit, wherever the Spirit leads you, that allows them to entertain the possibility of doing the same thing themselves. It's like, well, if Dan and Kathy can do it, man, it has to be scary for them. It has to be all those things. So thank you. And how are you guys doing with the end date out there in the open now?
Okay, Nate, I don't know if you know, but this isn't how it works. Like, this is where the host sits.
I pastor. I can't help it. It's what I do.
So we, the end date is out there. And again, sometimes I'm slow to catch up. I thought everyone kind of knew that already because I kind of knew it. But then to make it official, we actually talked with our oldest son yesterday who kind of follows us from a distance in New York City. And so he was asking us how we felt about it. And we talked about Christmas and how when we walk out of the Christmas Eve services, what that might feel like. And so there's a lot of emotions surrounding that. And yet there is a lot of anticipation and hope and excitement for how God is going to show up in these next 6 months. And so you and I were talking before we started, before the microphones officially came on, about, just wondering how God's going to show up in our midst, in Hopevale Saginaw, in Hopevale Bay City, in our online community, and what God is doing here in our region as we continue to look to him to say, rewrite our story, or this is another chapter of the story. And the more we can submit to that and submit to what God is doing, and I'm going to tap into what you said yesterday too, look for what God is already doing and not just what we wish he would do. It could be pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, Nate, because you talked about, Dan's and my example of, okay, God said, we're all looking to where we're sent. You went September to September, and we're like, where are you sent? Everyone, we want all of us to kind of have a better view of that as we're talking to the Lord about it. But I feel like you and Amanda and your boys, like you had to look to that even before we came up with our whole send thing. You were living it, and I was thinking, you got plopped down in Bay City, Michigan, in the middle of a pandemic with 2 young kids. And you too went, okay, God, I don't know if this makes sense, but we sense you're leading. Do you want to give us a nod of that example? Because we're so glad you're here. It seems so obvious to me now that you're here.
Yeah.
Of course God was leading you, but how did he lead you from way down there where the chips and salsa are up to us? You know what I'm saying? Like, how did he communicate that to you?
Oh, that's a really long story.
I know. So, like, you got to just give us a little bit,
the
Nate.
little nugget.
Yeah.
When you were talking before we started about looking for assurances that, you're doing the right thing, what I will say is Jesus was really kind to us. And
I love that.
Long before we knew that he was going to bring us to Michigan, there were circumstances that happened, and there were steps of faith that we were invited to take. Some of them made absolutely no sense. But every time we took a step of faith, Jesus, the way I always describe it is he reaches out and grabs our foot, And so like Peter stepping off the boat into the water, every time he invited us into a step of faith and we trusted him with it, he caught our foot and did it in really kind ways that he didn't have to.
Yeah.
But he did.
Yeah.
So those are going to come as you guys continue to take those steps of faith. And the destination really followed. Yeah, there's a detail. Like, I'll share a specific detail. So I had a friendship with Paul Miller, Pastor Paul, our executive pastor.
Paul is Paul, or the other
just
Paul?
Okay. This one's just Paul.
Got it.
And he was our campus pastor down in Texas before the Lord led him up this way. And he was our connection to Hopevale. So he told us about the opportunity. We ended up, he asked if I'd be interested in submitting my resume, my name, all that kind of stuff. So we ended up doing that. And the first communication we had with the personnel team from Hopevale, that was like the first thing. It was a video interview. So I was sitting in our kids' playroom in Texas, and we went into it like, we're not moving to Michigan,
right?
And I remember even Moses will tell the story, our son, our 12-year-old Moses, that I picked him up from school one day and I was like, hey, bud, you want to move to Michigan? Like a flippant kind of thing. And, but that first call, for us, it was the who before the where. And so that's why I said that on the message yesterday, was I was sitting in that video interview and I asked a lot of questions of that team. And as so many of them shared their answers, I was like, oh no, I think I love these people.
Yeah.
And that really informed it. But even that was preceded by several different steps of faith that led us to a place where this was even a potential opportunity. And if we hadn't followed those early steps of faith, then we never would have ended up here. So the final leap to move up here was a big step of faith, but there were so many others before that. But every single one of them, the Lord's just been so kind to us, and his plan was not what we imagined. It's not, it was unexpected for us, but it's been so good. And not just that we enjoy Hopevale, but we love this region, and our boys are incredibly happy here. And Amanda, my wife, has had opportunities here that she may have not gotten if we were in Texas, and for her career. So there's been a lot of different ways the Lord's shown his kindness to us, but it was a lot of simple steps of faith. So I said that was going to be, we were going to try to make it a nugget. That was still kind of long. But.
No, but I love it. And I love that we talked yesterday about God writing stories and rewriting stories. And I feel like your story of a huge leap being sent from Texas to here, and then Dan's and my leap from being sent from here to who knows where, we're not the only ones.
No.
So it's like everybody, when you say it was unexpected what Jesus was doing, I got to believe everybody listening to us today and everybody that sat in those chairs yesterday or listened to you yesterday, nobody's looking at their story going, this is kind of what I signed up for.
Right. Right.
You know, there was a turn, there was a bump, there was a valley, there was a mountaintop that we had never thought we were going to do at this age or in this season of our life. And so I think the joy and the safety is to know that God's got our foot.
Yeah.
You know? And so I don't know how people do it without knowing God is in it with us. We are not alone. We are not abandoned. But everybody's doing that, whether they choose to move houses and states and jobs, or whether they're just trusting God for tomorrow. The lessons are still the same. The God is still the same.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't always go easy. You know, it doesn't always, even as he shows his kindness, there's hard stuff. Like Amanda and I, as I drove Amanda and the boys up in April of 2020, we were stopped for gas, like our last gas stop before we got to Bay City, and Amanda got a call that her mom had a cancer diagnosis. My dad fought cancer also after we got here. He got a cancer diagnosis, which when we were talking about moving, one of the things that we specifically talked about and that we actually had a lot of fear over was like leaving our families, and not just we loved being with them and that they helped us out a lot, but that they might need us, and if we weren't there. So there's things like that. Even when you're taking steps of faith, it doesn't mean there's not going to be challenges and huge challenges. And, but even in the midst of that, like I know I can't speak for Amanda. I'll speak for myself. With my dad and what he went through, it taught me so much, and it wasn't comfortable, but it taught me a lot about God's goodness, and obviously made me appreciate my dad more and appreciate the time I have with him more. But it also taught me a lot about God's goodness. So anyway, it doesn't mean there's not going to be challenges, but in the midst of all of it, Jesus will catch your foot.
Yeah.
And if you take the steps of faith, he'll not only catch your foot, but he'll also do things he doesn't have to do.
Yeah.
To just be loving. So we call those God winks. So there's also those God winks along the way too, where it's like, I got you, you know, like I'm going to do abundantly more than you can hope or imagine.
Right.
And here's a little bit of that, you
Right.
know? So I'm looking forward to what the Lord's going to do through you guys, whatever's next.
Right.
And then the way the Spirit's going to use your obedience to inspire people here to follow a similar path. Hopefully not all of them to leave Hopevale and go other places, but to trust Jesus with their life and with their future.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm excited too. So let's take a little journey back to yesterday.
Okay.
I want to talk about Paul.
Okay.
Because, I like Paul.
Okay.
But we haven't talked about Paul a lot on the podcast or from,
Yeah.
from the stage, because we talked about the disciples a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
they're my favorite. Peter and how they do dumb stuff, and
Yeah.
Jesus somehow just kind of goes, okay, let me just reteach you.
Right.
You can ask dumb questions. It's okay. And so we all related to that. So Paul yesterday's different. Because he had this
Yes.
pedigree, and he had these brains, and he had, all of this knowledge and all of the things. And I'm like, I didn't know how to feel about him. So I appreciated you kind of painting us a picture about Paul. And I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what surprised you as you went and looked at his life a little bit, or what you thought about Paul.
Yeah. What I think about Paul is an incredibly fascinating person. And one of the practices I always try to do when I'm reading scripture is to put myself in the shoes of that person and to imagine what their life was like. And because, again, these are real people, real lives, real feelings, real struggles, real hopes, real joys, all of it. And so to put yourself in Paul's shoes, that's part of what we tried to do, was describe what life was like for Paul and imagine, like, I really ended up a place where I was thinking through, like, did Paul ever hear Jesus teach?
Yeah.
And what was he thinking when he heard Jesus teach? And knowing, again, that the Spirit works in us, and that when salvation happens, it's the result of a lot of work on the front end, and sometimes work that we don't always appreciate that the Spirit's doing in us through different things. But the events we know about Paul's life, the Spirit was undoubtedly working in those things, and some of them are ugly things, right? So he was incredibly gifted, incredibly intelligent.
Super type A.
Yeah.
Strong leader.
A tremendous leader. I mean, a lot of the qualities that you would want in someone, right? For a leader or a friend. And so how did he end up in the place that he was, where he was persecuting Christians? And so I think you can follow that trail and understand how he got there, when culturally he was taught to expect the Messiah was going to do something very different than what he saw Jesus doing. Just the simple fact that Jesus was crucified the way he was, for people like Paul, was confirmation of the bias they had towards a different version of the Messiah that they wanted than the one that they got. Because they did not have eyes towards Jesus being a spiritual conqueror.
Yeah.
They had eyes towards a tangible conqueror. And that's not what they saw when they saw Jesus. And along with that, when he came, he challenged so much of what they were practicing and doing.
Right.
And so much of the superficial man-made layers they had laid on top of what God had given them in their faith, Jesus systematically started challenging all those things. And he was pushing not only at their practices, but also was pushing at their desire for security and power. And he was doing all of that to draw all of them near to the Father, as the Father really is, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, if you look at all of that, you can see how Paul could get to where he was at, not excusing him, persecuting the church or approving of the murder of someone, that kind of thing. It's not excusing any of that. You can just see the road that would lead him there. But then to have that encounter with Jesus the way that he did, and we can't even imagine what happened there, And then the thoughts that Paul had, I think that was one of the things that you think of Paul's conversion. And in the West, we really do think of salvation as like, I wasn't saved and then I'm saved.
Well, they gave a talk and there was a prayer.
Right.
And I prayed the prayer, and the prayer was the magic formula.
Yeah.
I know, but so speak to that, because I loved how you did it. I know I just interrupted you, but give us more of that.
Yeah. So if you put yourself in Paul's shoes, thinking through those 3 days. So he has this encounter with Jesus on the Damascus Road. We have no indication that he was saved at that moment. It got his attention for sure.
Yeah.
But then he spent 3 days fasting and kind of in isolation and in Damascus. So that was the part I was like, what happened in those 3 days? And he's sitting there blinded, which that alone would expression I use is toast your noodle. Like,
Oh, yeah, it
like
sure
just
would.
like, oh my gosh, it just captures your attention and blows your mind. So he's sitting there, and what happened in those 3 days, and then what kind of conversations did he have with God during that time, where he's like, Paul thought he was right
Yes.
before. He was convinced, a super intelligent, gifted man was convinced, in his own words, he talks about that in scripture. He was convinced that he was right.
Right.
So in that 3 days, that was 3 days of like, what, I had it all wrong.
Yeah, got to unravel
And
this.
how
untangle it.
did I get there? And then what have I done? And you see that struggle with Paul throughout his writings. It resurfaces more than once that there is tremendous guilt and shame that he feels for the role that he played beforehand. And so all of that was obviously probably being expressed in those 3 days. But then there was also almost a commissioning taking place in those 3 days too, where God had this tremendous plan of what he was going to do through Paul. So that's where I was captured by him, was those 3 days. And then thinking about the process that all of us go through, where we may not have approved of the murder of someone, we may not have been persecuting the church, but we were going down a different road than we ended up going down. And I use the phrase rewrite. That's not accurate, because the truth is God has ordained our story from the beginning, and he knows not only where we're at now, but he knows where he's taking us. So the story didn't get rewritten. It just appears to be rewritten because we think it's going this direction, and then it takes a right-hand turn. But for a lot of us, the 3 days might be 6 months or 2 years or 10 years, whatever. But we all go through that circumstance where God gets our attention. We have to reconcile what we thought was true with what we've realized is true. And then we prepare to take the first steps in the new direction.
Right.
So that space, that's what I thought of with Paul. And then the other part, again, is remembering that he was alive the same time Jesus was.
Right.
And not only were they alive during the same period of time, but they were in the same place for a big chunk of that time. And they were both prominent figures during that time. Paul was he was a rising star in the Pharisees. So he was taught by the most well-known gifted teacher amongst the Pharisees, rabbi. And so he was well-known, and he was getting lots of opportunity within the Pharisees. And then you have Jesus that was making waves also. They're both in Jerusalem around the same time.
Yeah.
So again, you asked like details about Paul, what I think about Paul, and that's what I think about, are all those different things, and then him processing all this different information, but then coming face to face with Jesus as he really is, and how that changed him, and then his obedience to go wherever the Spirit sent him. And he ended up doing what appears to be crazy things that didn't make sense, following the Spirit's lead to different provinces and different places, and putting himself in harm's way, and doing things even in his leadership that were countercultural, the way he treated different groups of people as a leader. So I don't know if I went
No.
kinda
Yeah,
down a
that's
rabbit
all
hole,
good.
but
When we think about Paul, I just think about all of us as well. Paul had an image in his mind of who he thought Jesus or God was going to show up, how the
Right.
Messiah was going to show up.
Right.
And he needed to replace that with what God's plan was.
Right.
I feel like that's all of us.
Yeah.
Like if you were to talk to your neighbor today or to revisit your own story, you're like, I had a picture. I had a
Right.
picture of how this was supposed to work.
Right.
And American Christianity writes our own story about that. And so I'm trying to think, is it the courage of Paul that was able to untangle that and receive from the Lord the eyes to see, after he was blinded, Jesus for who he really was? Or did God just do it for him? Because Paul was not going to see it on his own, like until he was blinded on the road, right?
Right.
So like what part of it was Paul going, I learned all these things and it led me here, versus God going, I'm going to change it up right now.
Yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah.
Jesus most definitely intervened
Yeah.
in a dramatic way. He doesn't do it that way for everybody. He does do it,
Yeah, he's involved.
right, but he doesn't always do it quite that dramatically. But then it was all the other stuff with Paul too. Neither of them happened in isolation. Any faith comes by revelation. So taking that step of faith, you can want it for someone, you can put all the right information in front of someone to lead them to the truth, but ultimately the Spirit has to provide revelation.
I completely agree with that.
So in that moment, Jesus intervened. Jesus physically appeared, stepped into the picture, but the Spirit, either in that moment or in that 3-day period of fasting and thinking and praying that Paul did, the Spirit gave him the revelation that he needed.
Yeah.
So took all that preparatory work and knowledge, but then gave divine revelation. So that happens with salvation, but it happens with other spiritual truth too, where even people that are believers, there may be an area that they're learning about and growing in their faith, but then all the knowledge in the world doesn't get them where they need to be. It takes revelation from the Spirit to understand that. For me, my identity in Jesus was one of those things where I was a believer for a long time and then began to learn about who Jesus was in me and who I was in him and what that meant. And I had someone giving me lots of good information, but ultimately there was a moment where the Spirit gave revelation and everything crystallized, and it was like, now I see it, you know.
Right.
It's you know, it's like when Jesus healed the blind man, you know, it's like, wow, I didn't see it before, and now I see it for the first time.
Right.
I can't explain it, but man, the Spirit did something to help me see it.
Right.
It was right there in front of me the whole time. So the Spirit was definitely involved even in that moment to give revelation to Paul, and then in those 3 days after, to continue to give revelation of, you were wrong.
Yeah.
This is why you were wrong. This is what you were hoping the Messiah would be, but this is who Jesus actually is and what he's actually come to do. And this is why it's better than what you wanted.
Right.
And then slowly, and this is what my plan for you is. I'm going to use who you are. I'm going to use your training in Greek philosophy. I'm going to use your ability to communicate and to put ideas together in a way that people understand to impact countless lives. And all that came by revelation. So for us, especially like kind of turning a corner to think outwardly, for the people in our lives that are exploring Jesus, they're wrestling with God, whatever, we have to be mindful of that the Spirit's the one that's ultimately going to give them revelation. And we have to be patient for that. And hopefully if we're patient for the Spirit's revelation in their life, we can be patient with the person too. Yeah. Because if you judged Paul by his behavior up till that point, you would have been like, hey, he's a lost cause.
Right.
And the one writer that I read in preparation, a commentary, talked about how the early church leaders were not praying for Paul's conversion. They were praying for protection from Paul. Yeah. They knew Paul. Right. And if they ever mentioned him to God, it was, please protect us from him. And please don't let him know about us. Please keep him at an arm's length, whatever. Just the idea that, and who knows, maybe somebody was praying for his conversion, but more than likely, given our human proclivities towards self protection, there was probably nobody praying for Paul's conversion. I was like, oh my goodness. Like, who are the people in my life that I'm just praying for protection from? Right. Instead of praying that Jesus will intervene in their story. You know? That was convicting. Yeah.
And the fact that God can intervene, like when you said no one's beyond God's reach.
Right.
For all the disciples and all the people watching, Paul was kind of the pinnacle example of that. And God said, just watch me. Yeah. Like, this is it. Because my revelation is more powerful. It changes hearts. It changes lives. And so that example. But you know what I was thinking about too? I was thinking about Ananias, and it's like the go exclamation point thing. Why don't they, is there anywhere else in Scripture where they tell us how Ananias might have gone, seriously? Like... Like you said, go exclamation point, Ananias, and then your next part of the story is he just went.
Yeah.
But like, it's Paul,
the
guy that just said Stephen can die, and then the prison and the death of all the thing, and you're like, Ananias had to be a little bit freaked out.
Oh, he definitely was. I mean, he reasons with the Lord. Yeah, and we didn't look at all the scriptures there from Acts 9. I told the story along with the specific verses we looked at, but he definitely reasons with the Lord there when the Lord gives him that direction, which, I mean, first of all, we're glossing over the fact that the Lord spoke to Ananias. I mean,
Right.
we don't know if he ever
Yeah.
spoke to Ananias before then or not, right? So wait a second. First of all, this is awesome. Second of all, who? So I think we're given enough. And then we also, I think the disciples' reaction in Jerusalem too.
Right.
It's all the same. They all knew who Paul
Right.
was. Again, he wasn't a mystery man. Like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And, they were known, their name, where they're from, family name. So the Lord tells Ananias exactly who to go to. So when the Lord identified him, immediately Ananias wasn't like, wait a second, I think I know a Paul.
Yeah.
He knew him.
Ooh, yeah.
And so, that reaction, he definitely, wow, this is amazing, Jesus, you're talking to me.
Yeah.
This is so cool. But I just want to let you know, this is not a good dude that you're sending me to. Yeah. And I don't know, I've had the experience of people of the Lord putting specific people on my heart. So, I've never heard an audible voice saying, go to so-and-so, but I have, and it happens often where I feel like the Spirit's like, this person needs to be reached out to.
Right.
And a lot of the time that's people, from Bay City at our campus, that maybe it's somebody that's going through something or somebody that went through something. But then sometimes it's just like a name out of the blue. And it's always somebody that I know, but somebody I haven't thought of in forever.
Right.
And I've learned those moments aren't just me remembering somebody. It's the Spirit putting someone in my heart. So I've had that experience. And I've also had the experience of like, really? Like, you want me to, I mean, I'll reach out to them.
Right.
I don't think they're going to respond. But the interesting thing has been when the Spirit does that, there's always a response. And there's always a sense of like, man, I really needed that today. Or yeah, I've really been struggling.
Yeah.
And so we see that with Ananias, and it's like, it seems crazy, but the Spirit does it all the time with us.
Yeah.
And even just sending a simple text message when he puts somebody on your heart, there's a reason he does that. So anyway, but yeah, that struggle, it's really interesting. And then the disciples in Jerusalem, the same thing. And it's like, it's from one verse, they're scared of him. Then Barnabas speaks up for him, advocates for him. And then it's just the way Scripture treats it. Sometimes it's like he's just off and running.
Yeah.
But there was a period of time described there where all of them were like, let's take this slow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but then as they heard him preach, as he preached with power, as he, at his own risk, proclaimed Jesus, then it was like, okay, maybe we can trust this guy.
Right.
But,
You know what? Two things that come to mind. One, I love the example that Ananias got to chat it up with the Lord.
yeah.
And kind of go, this doesn't seem right from my perspective.
Yeah.
But he didn't get stuck there.
No.
Because a lot of us, I can have those conversations with God. I'm perfectly comfortable telling God why I think he might be wrong.
Yeah.
But I could get totally stuck there. And it's like, okay, Ananias said it, but he's like, I'm going to go because God said go, and I'm going to trust what he said.
Yeah.
And then I love how the disciples, you think by now they would have known Jesus always doing something that you didn't expect.
Right.
Like how they figured out that they had the playbook and they knew how it was going to play out. It hadn't played out like they thought all this time.
Right.
But they're still now, they're like, seriously? This guy?
Yeah.
Like, he's not one of us.
Yeah.
You know? So again, the lesson for us is get ready for God to not work in the way you may expect him to. Know how close you are to him and how much time you spend with him. Open up our eyes. Ask God to show us. I always say to give me the lens that I can see. Give me the eyes of Jesus, give me the heart of Jesus, give me the mouth of Jesus. So it's like, I know that I need to shift the way my flesh might naturally go to be in line with what he's already doing.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to go back to what you said about that dialogue with Ananias, because there's one thing I wanted to do in the message yesterday.
Yeah, cutting room floor. Tell me.
Yeah, it was to destigmatize wrestling with God.
Yeah, tell me this. I was going to ask you more about this.
Right. So there's nothing wrong with the conversation Ananias had with Jesus. And it is okay to question Jesus. it is okay to wrestle with God. It's okay to be honest and real in our expressions towards God, our conversations with God. There is nothing wrong with that. Is this like a look at the camera kind of moment?
Yeah, look it.
There is nothing wrong with doing it.
Right.
And authentic faith is born out of wrestling with God. I would be more concerned with someone that said, I've never wrestled with God.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, 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 whoa. And even going back to what we talked about Jesus as he really is, I'm convicted that there are a lot of people who have spent their life worshiping the Jesus they've created.
I know.
Instead of Jesus as he is. And the process of reconciling the Jesus we've created with Jesus as he really is the wrestling. That's that inner conflict. All of us create an idea of who Jesus is. All of us, like Paul and the Jews, their expectations of what the Messiah would do. All of us have expectations of what we want Jesus to do. And reconciling what we've created in our mind, what we hope he'll do with who he really is and what he's actually doing, that's wrestling with God.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it, and it is absolutely healthy. And the idea that over time, and especially the Western church, we've created the idea that that's not okay is wrong. So it's not just that it's okay to wrestle with God. Putting out the idea that wrestling with God is not okay is wrong. So that wrestling with God, we have to create a safe space for people to be able to wrestle with God. For some people right now, they're trying to delineate their understanding of who Jesus is, who he really is, with their experience in the church over a period of time.
Right.
They've seen things in organized religion that don't match up with who they see Jesus to really be.
Right.
So that's a process. A lot of people call it deconstruction.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that process.
Yeah.
And whether it's wrestling with God or you call it something specific like deconstruction, there's nothing wrong with those processes. And as a church, we have to be able to give people a safe place to do that. And it doesn't mean that we don't continue to speak love and truth into them as they wrestle. I think there's a way for us to balance giving people that safe space and also helping them, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we're just going to back off and give you the safe space to do it. This is safe. You're able to, and some of that is like, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, like, this doesn't make sense to me. It's okay to say, how do I reconcile this thing with this thing? They don't seem to go together.
Right. Even
to look at scripture and be like, wait a second, this passage says this happened at this event, and this passage said this happened at this event. How can they both be true? All of those things, we need to welcome that and foster an environment where people can safely explore Jesus and safely wrestle with God. Our culture that doesn't, the people in our community that don't yet have faith in Jesus, they need that so desperately. And that's the piece that they have not seen in the Big C church, a lot of them. They don't feel like they can ask a question.
Yeah.
And part of the reason they feel that way is because they see so few Christians being honest about the questions that they have.
Right.
So that means, like, if we're, even as a pastor, there's pressure, like when you're asked about a specific thing, to have like a ready to go answer. And even as a pastor, that means that we have to be willing to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or even we don't know.
Yeah.
And one of the healthiest things that I've learned to do is when people come to me as a pastor and they're like a very specific question about scripture or about God, is if I don't know, if I haven't wrestled it to the ground myself, I say, I don't know, but I'm going to look at it.
Yeah.
Or let's look at it together.
Right.
Or let's spend time over the next several weeks. Let's dive in it together and maybe see what we can figure out. But that I just, more than anything, that was my prayer coming out of yesterday, was that people would see that, because I believe it's true that Hopevale is a safe place for people to wrestle with God. But my hope is that people began to see that that's true. And I hope that that can almost become a value for us moving forward. It's always been, I think, kind of an intrinsic value, but to be explicit with it and say, this is a safe place to wrestle with God.
Right.
I think it's healthy for us, it's healthy for our people, and it's healthy for our community.
I completely agree.
So anyway, going back to that, there's nothing wrong with Ananias saying, wait a second, Jesus didn't react to that. Like, he didn't, thump him on the head or anything.
I'll zap you. I'll choose somebody else.
No, he just said, he's my chosen instrument. Go do it. And then you can imagine the conversation Ananias is having along the way. Like, all right, I'll go. But I mean, you got to know. You got to know who this guy is.
This ain't going to work out, Jesus. So
but then imagine the flip side of it when Ananias began to see what happened in and through Paul. It's like, oh my goodness. And if Jesus said to Ananias a separate occasion to go to somebody else, he's like, all right, I'll go because I saw you do it before and I saw you do it with Paul.
And again, so it's like back to us, and God uses, no one is beyond God's use.
I think I said no one is outside God's reach. And that's I think I crafted that for us as believers so that we don't limit who God can reach. And then for those that haven't placed faith in Jesus, it's not only his reach, but to me, purpose was important there. So no one is beyond God's use.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's almost, I think people can think, if you're not a believer, I think it's understandable that you would receive God's love, but not believe he has a purpose for you.
Right.
Which might prevent you from a relationship with him. So it's like, if there's a God, I could see that God loves me, but that's where it ends.
Yeah.
But to know no one is beyond God's use, that means that not only does he love you, but he has a plan and purpose for you, and a plan and purpose for everything that's already happened in your life.
Yeah.
And a plan and purpose for you moving forward, for your good and for the good of those around you too. So, yeah, and that's the other thing coming out of yesterday. My hope was that all of us would be mindful of the people we've placed outside of God's reach, and that we wouldn't limit God to just reaching the people that we're comfortable with. And that can mean so many different things, that can mean specific people in our life, but that can also mean groups of people. But whether it's a specific person that we've been like, they're a lost cause, to reopen the possibility that Jesus may want to rewrite their story. But it may also be a group of people that we're not comfortable with, that maybe we don't understand, and God can reach anyone, anyone he wants to. He's not limited by our comfort. So my hope is that people brought that out yesterday too. Like, everybody walked out thinking, who am I limiting God from reaching? Because I need to be open. And as they're open to God reaching them and entertaining the possibility of God reaching them, maybe God then begins through the Spirit to give them some compassion that they didn't have before.
And maybe continue to open our eyes to, what part could I play?
Yeah.
What's my Ananias part? What's my Barnabas part in this? That I might not need to own the whole situation, but what's my part in this story? And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about people going through their days. So they got to make breakfast. They got to get their kids dressed. They've got to pay the bills. They've got to go to work. They've got to get the car washed. And it's like, it just filled up with a lot of tasks that are all things God has asked us to do and to fill our days with. But when we can take a step into asking God to show us the spiritual realm of what's going on in those 24 hours, in those 168 hours of a week, where we're like, the person that I talk to when I'm filling up my gas, or the person that I'm at the park with my kids, and noticing that God is writing stories all around us, and I can speak to that. And you nudged us yesterday to have conversations, like start the spiritual conversation. Where do you find your hope? And just being willing to talk about something other than what Dan and I call the sale at Meyer, like, Mark 1, Mod 1. And you don't have to like do a whole sermon situation, but just like be keeping in step with the Spirit and realizing that our life can be filled with so much more purpose than just getting from 6 a.m. to whenever we go to bed at night. You know?
Yeah. So I think of one specific resistance we have to when the Spirit's nudging us. So for Ananias, he was like, this dude is going after the church. This man, Jesus, is approving of the murdering of people in our church. We're not going to experience a lot of that, probably. hopefully. What we're more likely to experience, like specifically what it's on my mind, is I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
Where all of us, I think, if we're in Jesus and Jesus is in us, we've had moments where we can see someone has spiritual need. And we know we're being nudged by the Spirit. And our reaction in the moment is, I don't have time for this. So if it's a neighbor, like we're trying to get, like you're saying, like we're trying to get the kids ready for school the next day, and we're trying to get make sure clothes are ready to go and lunches are packed, all that kind of stuff. We're trying to take the trash out, and then the neighbors we say, "Hey, how you doing?" And they're like, well,
Yeah.
And in our mind we're thinking, I don't have time for this. Please
Right.
no, please no.
Yeah.
That's where I think that's the easy step. And then the moments where he nudges us, and that's a question that I feel like works really, really well. It's not, can I speak to you about our Lord and Savior?
Yeah.
It's, where do you turn for hope?
Yeah.
And all of us have had a period of time here the last couple of years where hope sometimes has seemed distant.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to talk to another parent at a kid's sporting event, or your child's teacher, or someone you interact with at work, just to say, man, this has been a rough couple of years. Where did you turn for hope?
Mm-hmm.
What helps you get through
Mm-hmm.
each day? We're not resistant to being sent in this dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
We're resistant to these little nudges that the Spirit gives us. So specifically, though, that idea of, I don't have time for this, that's the piece that maybe people that are listening to this podcast, watch for that response in yourself.
Yeah.
And when you get that response, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
And that that person's potential relationship with Jesus, to know and follow him and experience all the wonder and joy and fulfillment that we get out of it, it just takes a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Spirit's nudging you toward it, he's going to give you all the time that you need. All the other
Yeah.
stuff's going to be taken care of. But yeah, to be obedient in those little nudges, I think that's the key.
Yeah, and for those of us that feel like God feels distant, or like we haven't seen him write a fresh story in front of our eyes for a while, imagine what what you said. What do you think Ananias thought when he saw this all happening after he took that step? And if you want to see God move, maybe we need to take a step towards it, and then God's going to be like, I'm going to just show you a little bit about who I am.
Yeah,
Don't we all want that?
definitely.
Yeah, we all want that. And so then when you think about Paul's story too, it was even at the stoning of Stephen, God was already writing that story when you say it's a process. So that person that asked you that, or that nudge, this isn't starting from ground zero. God been doing other stuff. So you're just going to play your part in that.
Yeah.
Take the pressure off of that, but
Yeah.
speak a word, stand up and share a bit of your story,
Right.
and see how God evolves that. And those are the lives we want to lead, right? We want to
Yeah.
see Jesus in our midst. We don't just want to buy groceries and do our daily tasks. We want to see it infused with the power of Jesus, and he's got so much more.
Yeah, it's joining him in what he's
Yeah,
already doing.
right.
It really is. My favorite Christian writer, communicator, he's no longer living, is a guy named Major W. Ian Thomas. He was a British guy.
Got a lot of names.
Yeah. He has this quote where he talks about, he says, there's nothing more boring than Christianity without Christ. But there's nothing more exciting than being called into the invincible, almighty purposes of God, with all of God's limitless resources available in Jesus to accomplish those purposes. And I'm paraphrasing it. But to me, that's the quote I think about when you say that. It's, if we think about the people in our life, we don't want to give them religion, which is what Christianity without Christ is. If we're focused on that, that's not going to help them. It doesn't improve their life. It doesn't do anything for them. But joining Jesus in what he's doing in them, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing more exciting than that. And if you're in a place where you're like, I'm not hearing from God, I'm just, I feel like I'm in a spiritual desert right now. If you're in that place, that could be a good practice, is just think about the people that have been placed around you. There's power in where you've been put. So think about the people that he's placed you with. and then just begin to imagine what Jesus might be doing in their life, and then begin to imagine, how do I cooperate with that? How do I jump in and join him? So like one of the ways I think about where Jesus is at work, I had this idea. My mom grew up in an agricultural background in Texas. Her parents, she grew up on a farm and ranch. So I spent a lot of time there growing up too. And so I had this idea for a long time that me and my walk with Jesus was like it was like a farm, this ranch kind of setting. Mm-hmm. And in the morning I would go down and Jesus would be in the kitchen, and I would be like, all right, where are we going today? And Jesus would be like, I don't know, let's go work in that field over there. And then we'd go work in that field. And what was transformational for me to understand what Jesus does was to realize that Jesus never stopped working. So I had to stop working. I had to go get rest.
Yeah.
He never left the field. So the process of my journey with Jesus is more like me getting up in the morning, and I have to look for the field that he's at work in. And then I go join him in that field. I join him in what he's already doing. And then not only do I get to experience work with him, but the Father is with him and the Spirit is there. And as Jesus is doing what he's doing in that field, and I join him there, I get to experience the relationship that the Trinity has with one another and the conversations they're having, and I get to join in that conversation. So it's not like Jesus has to decide where he's going to work. He never stops working. It's a tireless work that he's constantly engaged in to draw people near to the Father. So for me, it's more about, all right, these are the people in my life. This is where they're at in their spiritual journey, and I have an eye, because the Spirit's given me that, an eye towards what Jesus is at work doing in their life. So it might be my kids, it might be my spouse, it might be my coworkers, it might be my friends, my parents, my neighbors, whoever it is. But to think through, this is where they're at, this is what Jesus wants from them, and maybe this is what Jesus is doing. So then I can cooperate with what he's doing. I can join him in what he's already doing. If you do that practice, man, that can really help you begin to experience some spiritual renewal and refreshment, because it's encouraging to see him at work in other people's lives, but then to join him in that, there's nothing better than that, nothing more exciting than that, nothing more fulfilling than cooperating with what he's doing in someone's life. And like Ananias did with Paul, he cooperated with it, and then when he ultimately saw what happened, imagine Ananias' experience there, the way his faith grew the first time he heard Paul proclaim Jesus in a synagogue. It's like, wow, this is amazing. So that could be a practice that would help not just the people that we're engaged with, but it would help us too.
Yeah. It's that capital L life we talk about at Hopevale, when that's what we were created for. Right. To be in relationship with God. Yeah. And to be about his business.
Yeah, that's sharing the hope of Jesus. Yeah. And if all we ever do is celebrate, we're not going to get very far. Yeah. It's the celebrating and the sharing. They're both important. Yeah. It's important that we come together to celebrate who Jesus is, but it's also vitally important that we share who he is. And that's what that is. It's sharing. Right. And when you do both, man, it's amazing what God does. He creates a movement of hope. Yeah. He did it in the Acts church, and he's going to do it now. I believe he's going to do it at Hopevale. He is doing it at Hopevale. Yeah. I
agree. So thank you yesterday too. I know I already shared this with you, but the way that you expressed the vision of what God is doing through Hopevale Bay City, but also Hopevale Saginaw, Hopevale Online, how he's using those to not just, nothing's an overflow, nothing's just get what I say butts and seats, but it's like God is doing a thing, and we are about inviting others to know and follow Jesus, and to remember why we're doing what we're doing, I think is so important. And God is doing it. I mean, he really is doing it. So it's like you said, we're keeping our eyes to the field going, where is he working today? So I'm going to let you close with another invitation to what might be happening next Sunday night that we might be invited to join with. So give it to us, and then we need to close out of here. Oh, Lord.
Hey.
Nate. Is Nate. Go.
Okay. So we're having a party.
Next Sunday.
City. We like to party. Yeah. In Bay City a little bit. We're going to be at Winona Park in downtown Bay City, down by the river. Yep. It's not the first time we've done this, but it's going to be the best time. Yeah. Yeah. And no, it's going to be great. We're going to have an amazing time of worship. Austin Mosden, our worship director, his new bride, Destiny Mosden. They'll be leading us in worship along with our worship team, and we'll be down there at the park. We've got games for the kids to play. We've got free ice cream from the Dairy Firm, which is a ice cream company out of Frankenmuth, and they're going to have their ice cream truck there. And we've invited other churches in the area, and we hope that everyone at Hopevale will come. And not only that they'll come, but they'll use this to do what we're talking about, which is to invite friends and neighbors to know and follow Jesus. So when we're talking about inviting people to know and follow Jesus, sometimes we conflate that with inviting them to church, and that can be both things. But sometimes that's a big bridge for people to cross, to go from not going to church to coming to one of our weekend gatherings. So this is one of those great things that is kind of a neutral ground. It's not a church. It's outside, and it feels a little bit safer to people than coming to one of our weekend gatherings does, if they're not in the church. So I really encourage people to come, not only our friends in Saginaw, but invite their friends and neighbors too. It's going to be a great time. 7 p.m. downtown.
Bring your soccer chairs, right?
Yeah, and chairs, blankets, however you want to sit, and bring a friend.
Yeah.
And we're going to worship. We're going to share our heart for the city, and then we're actually going to have a time of prayer for the city, and invited another local pastor from another church to join me for that.
Nice.
So it's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
We're going to have a lot of fun, and my dream is that at some point we're able to fill up that park.
Yeah.
We're down there a lot because we live in Bay City, and that park fills up for a lot of things. So my dream is that at some point we fill that park up for a worship night. So this will be a step towards that.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait. Dan and I will be there for sure.
Awesome.
And so we're looking forward to it. So I'm hoping many people that are listening will come with people with them, and we will lift up Jesus together.
It's going to be fun.
And we're not going to be weird. It's not going to be weird. It's going to be awesome.
We're going to party a little.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for sticking with us for this episode of The Deeper Dive, where we have talked for a while about all the things. And Nate, thanks for being with us today.
That's my pleasure.
So next week we'll be back. Dan will be here with Brent to chat it up about Stephen, I guess. So have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday night, and then we'll join you back here next time as we take a deeper dive.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale Church.